Welcome back to deploying a next-gen firewall for lab or testing. Part 3, Objects and Policies. During Part 1 and 2, we completed the initial configuration and the network settings. At this point, you should have completed Part 1 and 2 and have a next-gen firewall's management interface connected to your existing LAN network. The device and network settings have been configured to support our end state of 3 zones: Internet, LAN, and Wi-Fi, the required 4 interfaces, and the gateway services. During Part 3, we'll review the basic building blocks of policies. This includes address objects, applications and application groups, as well as the various security policies including antivirus, anti-spyware, vulnerability protection, URL filtering, file blocking, and wildfire analysis. We'll then combine all of these elements into some basic security policies. The next-gen firewall supports policy-based NAT, so we'll configure one NAT policy for default outbound traffic. First, we're going to create some address objects. Go to the Objects Address page and begin by entering an address for the management interface using the fully qualified domain name from the previous configuration. You can also create address groups using IP addresses. These two IPs are domain controllers. I'm going to add an additional tag called Active Directory. Create a second entry for the second domain controller, and we're going to use the existing tag. We'll use the tags in a moment when we define some address groups. Add any additional addresses for your environment. I'm going to add 3 IPs under the tag IPTV. Address objects simplify management by allowing a single location to update dynamic addresses. Those changes are then reflected against all policies and systems. The last addresses will be the network addresses for our LAN and Wi-Fi networks. Address objects support IP addresses, networks, network ranges, as well as fully qualified domain names. Go to the Address Groups page and start by adding a static domain controller group. For a static group, we'll manually add the address objects we created in the previous step. Next, let's create a dynamic group. A dynamic group leverages the tags we applied to the address objects. Any new address objects created with the Active Directory tab will automatically be added to the dynamic group. Complete a commit in order to see the address objects populated within the list. Commit completes, click the More, and you'll see the 2 address objects. Add any additional static or dynamic address groups for your environment. I'm going to add the IP televisions using the IPTV tag. Optional step in order to enhance dashboards and logging is to add your private networks as a region. You can also include your geolocation using latitude and longitude so that it displays correctly in the map screens. If you use multiple networks at a location, the list supports multiple entries. If you're connected to branch offices, you can also create regions and locations for them as well. It's always a good idea to perform many small commits versus large commits. The commit completes, we can go back to our address groups and validate that the IPTVs are showing up inside the dynamic group. Step will be to add some application groups. Go to the Application Groups page and click Add. The first group will be a general networking group. This will include common apps like DNS and ping. Use the application browser and filter by categories and characteristics to find additional networking applications you would like to allow. I like to limit the general networking applications to just what's required to onboard different devices. Things like DNS and NTP are great examples. In addition to filtering, you can also use keyword searches. Clicking on an application will bring up an application details screen. It includes characteristics and classifications of the application as well as which ports are assigned. Add any additional applications. Once you're done, go ahead and click OK to save the group. Application filters are dynamic application groups. Application filters are based off of the characteristics of known applications. Any new applications that are added with your defined characteristics will automatically be added to the group. While I'm not sure on all the applications being used on the network, there are definitely lists of applications that I don't want to allow. I'm going to create a never allow filter using the technology column to use peer-to-peer and browser-based RISC-V applications. These are all applications that, again, I'm going to create an explicit deny policy to make sure they don't come across my network. Review the list. If there are applications within the list that you need to allow exemptions, go ahead and click the X next to exclude. Once you've reviewed all the applications, go ahead and click OK to save the filter. Earlier, we saw the details available for the applications defined within the next-gen firewall. The applications had associated ports. Oftentimes, organizations choose to use custom ports for known applications. Services provide you the ability to create custom TCP and UDP ports and still use the application inheritance and characteristics to provide full protection. Simply define the custom ports and use those in your security policies. This is only required if applications use non-standard ports. Now let's explore the tags page. When we go to the tags page, we're going to see all the tags that we've created in the previous steps. For example, Active Directory and IPTV. Tags not only allow you to create dynamic groups, it also provides a way of organizing and viewing rules. I'm going to go ahead and create some colors and apply those to the individual tags. You can also create tags that are reflective of your network and security zones. We have Internet, LAN, and Wi-Fi. I'm going to create one for each. Use the same name, including capitalization, and this will also apply a color to those zones in the interface. Tags can be applied to objects manually, as we've done so far. They can also be added via the API, integration with third-party tools, and logging. Let's go ahead and commit the change to the firewall. The last dynamic object we'll discuss are external dynamic lists. External dynamic lists allow you to modify and maintain external dynamic lists. You can add these via HTTP sites, and they can be IP lists, URL, or domain lists. These are often referred to as EDLs. The most important building block of a security policy are the security profiles, as they define the protections applied to a connection after it's made or during the session. You can't modify predefined profiles. For my lab, I like to enable packet capture. To do this, simply clone the policies, give them a relevant name, and select packet capture. For anti-spyware, you can select different levels of packet capture based on severity. Repeat the process for the remaining profiles. Move on to vulnerability protection, repeating each of the steps. I like to include packet capture in the lab. As I do additional testing, I can now go to my traffic logs, download that packet capture, and review it in Wireshark. I'm going to go ahead and accelerate the video while I make my remaining changes. We'll review each of the details within each of the profiles in future videos, so don't worry about that now. You will notice within Vulnerability Protection that each of the alerts and actions are also broken up by client or server based. When you get to the URL filtering policy, you'll want to go ahead and clone the default and review the categories based off of your organization's policies and choose to allow, deny, alert, which simply logs the visit, or the option of continue. Continue will alert the user that their visit will be logged, and it gives them the option to select a continue button to proceed to the site. Using continue requires that the response pages have been configured. Next, review the file blocking profile. For my lab environment, I'm okay with the default profiles. You can review each of the profiles by clicking into the hyperlink, and again, you can always clone and make any manual adjustments you would like to make. To simplify management of security policies and future updates to security profiles, you can use security profile groups. Security profile groups allow you to specify one or more different profiles to apply within the same security policy. In the future, any changes to the security profile group will be reflected to all security policies. I recommend only creating security profile groups for combinations that you plan to reuse a number of times. Each policy will allow you to establish a custom group of security profiles within the policy itself. I'm going to create 4 different groups, 2 defaults and 2 strict. Each one of those will also have a file block policy applied. We now have the basic building blocks of the policies. We have addresses, applications, and security profiles to add protections to the connections in the applications. The next-gen firewall has a number of logging controls. Log forwarding profiles allow you to determine the severity of the logs and which endpoints those logs will be forwarded to, for example, syslog, externally, etc. For the lab, I'm going to go ahead and enable all logs for all log types. Each security policy can have its own log forwarding profile. This is very handy to limit nuisance logs. Before we move on to policy creation, let's go ahead and commit our changes. Step 2, Policies. In the Web GUI, go to the Policies tab. There are 2 default policies. There's an intrazone default allow and an interzone default deny. Our first policy is going to leverage the external dynamic list of known bad IPs. Name your new policy and under Rule Type, select Interzone. It's not necessary to use all elements of a security policy rule. For this rule, we're going to use any source. Destination is going to be the internet zone, and we're going to select the predefined IP addresses from the external dynamic lists. For application, we're going to leave it at any, and for service and URL category, we're going to change it from application default to any. For actions, we're going to deny. This is the deny rule. We do not need a profile setting. Let's go ahead and select a log forwarding profile. In the event we add external logging later, we'll only need to update the template. Because this is a lab environment, it's a good idea to use our application filter, which identified all known risky applications, and create an additional block rule. New apps and future updates that match the filter will be automatically implied or included within this rule. Once again, this can be a source any For destination, add the internet zone. For application, we're going to add our application filter group, which is called Never Allow. The service category from application default to any. Under actions, again, we can go ahead and select deny and select our log forwarding profile. Next, we'll create some specific rules for IP groups. Let's start with our management interface. Select rule type and enter zone. For source, we'll select our LAN zone, and this time we'll add our IP address object for our management interface. We're going to use this rule to capture all internet-bound applications and identify those applications. So for now, we'll leave this as any. Under the profile settings, select the strict group. Also select your log forwarding profile. Click OK. Create additional security policies to accommodate any of the additional address objects you created. Try not to include any user devices in these initial policies. Don't worry about adding applications at this time. We'll use the tools within the firewall to identify traffic and automatically add applications to the policy in the future. Next, we're going to create some web browsing policies. Our first policy is going to be for websites or URL categories which we decide not to log or are private. Name the policy and under rule type, select Enter Zone. For source, select LAN and Wi-Fi. We're going to select each of the network objects we created earlier. For destination, this will be Internet. Under Application, we're going to select Web Browsing and SSL. Under the Service URL Category tab, add any URL categories which are private or may meet PII or PCI regulations where you may not want to log the traffic. Under Actions, we're going to select our strict policy. We don't want to be completely blind, so we're going to add file blocking, but we're going to disable logging and click OK. Click on the down caret in any column and click Columns. Select the URL category column to display the URL categories within the security policy. Clone the web browsing policy and then select the policy. Rename this policy Unknown or Uncategorized URLs. Using clone is an easy way to replicate existing policies. For service and URL categories, delete the current categories and add Unknown. Unknown URLs have not been classified by the system. For these URLs, we're going to go ahead and apply or leave the strict policy with file blocking. Once again, clone the web browsing policy. This is going to be our default web browsing policy. For this policy, we're going to go ahead and select Service URL Categories, delete the existing and leave it to any. For this group policy, we're going to select Default. Create a clone of the web browsing default policy and click the link. This policy is going to be for identifying applications running on default ports or expected ports. We're going to remove SSL and web browsing and leave the policy to any, making sure application default is selected. Create a clone of your expected apps policy and click the clone link. This policy will be for applications running on unexpected ports or undocumented ports. Basically, anything else. As these applications are unidentified, we're going to choose a strict group profile. By default, intra-zone traffic is allowed. To eliminate internet traffic from showing up in the logs as allowed, it's a good idea to go ahead and create a block internet intra-zone rule. For this, we'll use an intra-zone rule type. For source, select the internet zone. Because this is intra-zone, we do not need to select a destination zone. Use the service URL category to any. Under Actions, we're going to select Drop. Since we're dropping the packets, we can go ahead and select None under Profile Settings. Go ahead and commit your changes. As part of the commit, the system does an analysis on application dependencies. This will be reported at the end of the commit. Click on the App Dependency tab to display any application dependencies. As you can see, traceroute requires ICMP. Let's go ahead and make that change. Turn to the Objects and Application Groups page, select General Networking, and add ICMP. When you're done, click OK. Go ahead and recommit the change. The App Dependency tab is no longer displayed. Next, we're going to create some internal zone policies. First, we're going to have a policy that goes from Wi-Fi to the domain controllers. This will allow us to determine which applications are specifically being used by the domain controllers and Wi-Fi clients. Clone the Wi-Fi to controllers policy and edit the clone. This policy is going to be for all other Wi-Fi to LAN traffic. Rename the policy, and under Destination, replace the DC Dynamic object with the LAN Network object, and click OK. The last policy will be for all LAN to Wi-Fi traffic. We're going to create the default NAT policy. Go to the Policies NAT page and click Add. Name the policy and go to the Original Packet tab. Under Source, select LAN and Wi-Fi for the internal zones. Destination zone will be Internet, and 1.1 is our Internet interface. We can go ahead and select the internal networks. On the translated packet, select Dynamic IP Import and change address type to interface address, selecting your interface IP. These options may be different depending on if you're using DHCP. Commit the changes. In preparation for plugging the firewall in, go to the dashboard, select Widgets, and add the system interfaces. Some firewall subscriptions require additional setup. Go to Device and Licenses and review all your current licenses. DNS Security is one subscription that does require some additional setup. DNS Security Policy is managed under Anti-Spyware. Edit your existing policies and go to the DNS Policies tab. You'll notice under DNS Security, you have specific options based on classification. Go ahead and edit any actions you see fit and enable packet capture where desired. Do this for both anti-spyware profiles. Next, create a new security policy. This security policy is going to be to block traffic to the DNS sinkhole. Select Block Known Bad Apps and select Add to add a policy below. Name your policy. For rule type, select Enter Zone. It's going to be in any rule going to the internet. And for the address, go ahead and select a new address object and add your DNS sinkhole fully qualified domain name. Once you're done, click OK. Under Service URL category, select Any. For Actions, Deny. For Group Profile, select None, and select your log forwarding profile. Go ahead and commit your changes. Before replacing your existing gateway, make sure to transition any DHCP reservations to the new DHCP servers. If you have any additional DNS entries, go ahead and add those now as well. Open the management interface and update the DNS settings. If you're using a DNS proxy, make sure to select the DNS proxy object or configure external DNS servers. That concludes Phase 3, Objects and Policies.